In the course of her many struggles, one of the greatest adversaries that Alexandra had to fight was her unusually powerful personality. Every person is called to subject the passions of his character, but in the case of Alexandra, this was even more difficult. And it can be understood only if one studies the reality about her physical and psychological background. She had 5 pregnancies in quick succession, all of them bringing to life robust babies through excessively difficult births. If one adds to these heart disease with the resulting difficulty in breathing, overwork, cyanosis, and swelling of the feet, sciatica to such a degree that very often she could not walk at all, unbearable neuralgia of the trigeminal nerve of the face, earaches, and acute migraine, then it is clear that the effect of all of these maladies on her psychic world was an unbelievable Golgotha. And all these things in combination with the constant soul-draining agony over the life and health of her child. If one bears in mind the intense struggle that Alexandra was obliged to impose upon her shattered psychology, then one can only admire her words. In my heart is love and forgiveness for everything. Though at times I'm not as patient as I ought to be, I want to be a better woman, and I try.
Alexandra adopted the faith with her whole heart and every fiber of her being, and everybody felt it very early on. Even her sister, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, who later became a nun and also the first member of the Romanov family to be made a saint after the revolution, was worried, that Alexandra was suffering from some kind of prelist, from some kind of spiritual delusion. But she wasn't. She just it was her calling, and as a result, they spent very little time in public. And particularly after 1905, the trouble of the revolution, the murder of Stolypin, the prime minister, Alexandra was less and less interested in going out in public and less interested in her children going out in public. She stayed away from those kinds of public events that people expected to see the Empress at. And it wasn't really until the First World War began that she started to make public appearances again. When you read the letters of Nicholas and Alexandra to one another, their charming flirtation with one another never ends. They were very loving and open. And I think what you can say about Empress Alexandra is she had a distrust of strangers. And she had a distrust of people outside of her own family. And that's a very difficult thing to have if you are an empress. You need to be equally kind and equally social with anyone who comes across your path. It's part of the job. And she wasn't particularly interested in living that way. She couldn't abide a false word or a false smile. She was utterly genuine. And the word today is she was very much her authentic self.
Simeon Fabritsky, an aide-de-camp to Nicholas, wrote the following about Alexandra. Her kind-heartedness marked everything she did, but this was especially true of the way she treated others, her constant concern for all the humble people she encountered, who had fallen on hard times through illness. The aid she provided was wide-ranging and included both financial and moral support. It's hard to imagine how many people Her Majesty helped with financial difficulties. how many children she provided with an education, and what a vast number of sick people she visited in various sanatoria. Many Russians came to see the Empress as a severe woman with a firm, stubborn character and enormous strength of will. Unkind, humorless, hugely influential with her husband and directing his decisions at her own discretion. That view is completely mistaken. Her Majesty not only treated all those around her warmly, but actually spoiled them, thinking constantly of others and taking pains on their behalf.
The following incident from the life of Empress Alexandra Feodorovna took place in 1914, before the war. It has been preserved by Natalia Vladimirovna Vostova, the wife of Ivan Vostov, an officer in the Semyonovsky Regiment. Ivan Vostov is known for having translated the Napoleonic Law Code into Ethiopian. This is the account by Natalia.
The imperial family was spending the summer in Livadia. The Empress was very fond of taking walks by herself. For this reason, she would often drive out of Livadia in an open carriage, and after travelling a few miles, she would step out and continue on foot, accompanied by one of her ladies-in-waiting. Always modestly dressed in a simple summer dress and sandals, without an elaborate hat, she would sometimes walk down to Yalta and quietly enter a church to pray without attracting attention. This is what happened on the day I am about to recount. The Empress stopped at the Outsky Church, prayed for a while, and lit candles before the holy icons. Inside the church stood a group of very poorly dressed people who had come to baptize a child. The priest had already put on his vestments, but it was clear that the family was waiting for someone, and so the service had not yet begun. The Empress was preparing to leave when the priest approached her and asked whether she would take the place of the Godmother, who was terribly late. The Empress graciously agreed. Taking the child in her arms, she stood beside the child's father, a poor shoemaker. When asked what name she would like the little girl to receive, the Empress simply answered, "Alexandra." During the service, she fulfilled all the duties required of a sponsor. Together with the shoemaker, she walked around the baptismal font 3 times, carrying the child in her arms in accordance with the rites of the church. After the baptism, the Empress signed the parish register of the Outsky Church with the simple inscription, Alexandra Romanova. Before departing, she shook hands with everyone who had come for the christening. After asking for the address of her goddaughter, she set off on foot. The next day, an imperial carriage arrived at the humble home of the shoemaker on the outskirts of Yalta. The lady-in-waiting, who had accompanied the Empress the previous day, brought little Alexandra an entire trousseau, along with a gift of 500 rubles for her parents from their most august godmother. Until the revolution, wherever she happened to be living, the Empress not only remembered her goddaughter, but also cared for her and for all of her many brothers and sisters, the children of the poor shoemaker. When the revolution broke out, one can only imagine that little Alexandra, whom everyone called the Imperial Goddaughter, suffered greatly along with her family because of her father's spiritual relationship to the Russian Empress. This was by no means the only incident related to me by the eyewitness, my sister-in-law, who was the very lady-in-waiting fortunate enough to accompany the Empress and to be present at the baptism of the shoemaker's child. Empress Alexandra Feodorovna was the embodiment of modesty and feminine, angelic goodness, and she always sought to perform her acts of kindness unnoticed by others. Oh, how I would have liked to have been a mouse in the corner, just to see the look on that shoemaker's face when the imperial carriage pulled up in front of his house the next day.